The first time I saw him, I almost dropped my coffee. He stood at the end of my driveway with a worn leather backpack slung over one shoulder. His dark hair was messy, his jaw carried the faint outline of a beard, and his nervous smile looked strangely familiar. "I'm looking for Daniel Carter," he said quietly. "I'm Daniel." He swallowed hard before speaking again. "I'm your son." For several seconds, the world seemed to stop. My wife, Emily, who had been watering the flowers near the porch, froze in place. Then she rushed toward us, covering her mouth as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Daniel, what if it's true?" 28 years earlier, I had lost contact with the woman I dated before meeting Emily. There had always been unanswered questions, but I never imagined someone would appear at my front door claiming to be my child. The young man introduced himself as Ryan. He handed me an envelope filled with old photographs, copies of birth records, and a faded picture of his mother. Everything looked convincing. Too convincing. Emily insisted we invite him inside. She hugged him within minutes, treating him like family before I had even asked half the questions running through my mind. Over dinner, Ryan told heartbreaking stories about growing up without a father, struggling through foster homes, and spending years searching for me. Emily cried. I almost did too, but something felt wrong. Tiny details didn't add up. Whenever I asked about places or dates, Ryan hesitated for just a second before answering. Most people would never notice. I did. That night, Emily begged me to give him a chance. "Even if there's only a small possibility he's your son," she said softly, "don't you owe him that?" I agreed. Over the following weeks, Ryan became part of our lives. He fixed things around the house, laughed at my jokes, and learned my routine surprisingly fast. Emily encouraged every moment. She constantly reminded me how wonderful it would be if I finally had someone to inherit everything I had built. That sentence stayed in my head. Not because of Ryan, because Emily had never cared about my estate before. Now she mentioned it almost every day. The more she talked about lawyers, wills, and family trusts, the more suspicious I became. Then one afternoon I walked into the kitchen earlier than expected. Emily didn't hear me. She was whispering on the phone. "Don't worry," she said. "Just keep acting like his son a little longer. Once the paperwork is signed, everything will belong to us." My blood turned to ice. I quietly stepped back before she noticed me. For the first time, I realized the impossible might actually be true. The young man living in my house wasn't my son, and my own wife might have hired him. I couldn't sleep that night. Emily's whispered phone call echoed in my head over and over. "Just keep acting like his son. Once the paperwork is signed." Those words destroyed every bit of trust I had left. The next morning, I acted as if nothing had happened. Ryan smiled when he saw me. "Morning, Dad." The words sounded natural, too natural. I forced a smile and poured him a cup of coffee. "If you're really my son," I said casually, "I'd like us to spend more time together." His face lit up. "I'd like that too." Emily looked relieved, convinced her plan was working. Over the next few days, I watched them carefully. They were always careful around me, but small mistakes began to appear. One evening I noticed Ryan checking his phone. A message flashed across the screen before he locked it. "She says don't rush him." She, not Mom, not Emily, she. Later that night, I quietly entered the guest room after Ryan had fallen asleep. I wasn't looking to invade his privacy. I was looking for the truth. Inside his backpack I found ordinary clothes, receipts, and an old notebook. Then I discovered a folded envelope tucked beneath the lining. Inside was a bank transfer receipt. The sender's name had been hidden. The amount was enough to convince almost anyone to play a role. My hands trembled. I took a photo and placed everything back exactly where I'd found it. The next morning, I called my attorney. "I want to update my estate plan," I said. He laughed. "Finally. But I want every change kept completely confidential." "Understood." Instead of naming Ryan as my heir, I created a new trust that wouldn't activate until a lengthy independent investigation confirmed every legal heir's identity. If someone was trying to rush my signature, they were about to be disappointed. That evening, Emily surprised me. "I've already booked a DNA test," she said cheerfully. For a brief second, I wondered if I had been wrong. Then she added, "The clinic said they can process everything quickly." Too quickly. Something still didn't feel right. I quietly contacted the laboratory myself. The receptionist checked the appointment. "Sir," she said, "the samples haven't even been collected yet." My heart sank. If no samples had been collected, what exactly was Emily planning to submit? The answer terrified me. Someone wasn't just lying. Someone was preparing fake evidence. The next morning, I canceled every meeting on my calendar. If my wife was willing to fake a DNA test, I needed proof before confronting anyone. I visited the clinic myself. The receptionist greeted me politely. "Mr. Carter, your appointment is scheduled for Friday. I'd like to know who booked it." She checked her computer. "It was arranged by your wife. And has anyone submitted samples already?" She shook her head. "No, sir." I thanked her and walked outside, feeling both relieved and alarmed. Emily hadn't completed her plan yet. That meant I still had time. Instead of going home, I hired a private investigator named Michael Harris, a former detective with 30 years of experience. "I don't need guesses," I told him. "I need facts." He nodded. "Then don't tell your wife anything." For the next week, I behaved like the perfect husband. I laughed at dinner. I complimented Emily's cooking. I even started talking about updating my will. Every time I mentioned my estate, Emily's eyes sparkled with excitement. Ryan, however, looked uncomfortable. He rarely asked about money. In fact, he often tried to change the subject. That detail bothered me. Was he really part of the scam? Or had someone lied to him too? 3 days later, Michael called. "You need to see this." His office walls were covered with photographs. One picture showed Emily meeting Ryan in a downtown cafe. Another showed them hugging before either of them supposedly met at my house. Then came the most shocking photo. Ryan was handing Emily a thick envelope. "What is it?" I asked. "We don't know yet," Michael replied. "But they met 5 different times before Ryan appeared at your door." So they knew each other. Without question, my stomach tightened. Every emotional moment in my home had been staged. Every tear, every hug, every story, it had all been rehearsed. Then Michael handed me another file. I also ran Ryan's background. There was no adoption record. No missing parent report. No evidence that he had spent years searching for me. Almost every part of his story had been fabricated. But here's the strange part, Michael added. His real name isn't Ryan. What is it? Ethan Brooks. And he's an out-of-work actor. The room fell silent. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. Emily hadn't simply found someone who resembled me. She had hired a professional actor. As I stared at Ethan's file, Michael slid one last photograph across the desk. It showed Emily meeting with a man I had never seen before. The man was wearing an expensive suit. On the back of the photo, Michael had written 4 words. A state attorney's office. Someone else was involved, and whatever they were planning was much bigger than a fake son. I drove home with the investigator's file locked in my briefcase. Every mile felt heavier than the last. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I had made one decision. I wouldn't confront Emily. Not yet. People who think they've already won make the biggest mistakes. Inside, dinner was waiting. Emily greeted me with a warm smile. "There you are," she said. "Ryan's been helping me all afternoon." Ethan, who everyone believed was Ryan, looked up from the table. "I made your favorite potatoes." I forced a smile. "They smell great." The meal felt painfully normal. Emily laughed at my jokes. Ethan asked about my business. Anyone watching us would have believed we were the perfect family. But I now knew every smile could be part of an act. The next morning, I called my attorney, James Porter. "I want every asset protected immediately." "Is something wrong?" he asked. "I'll explain later. For now, move everything into the trust we discussed." "It'll be done today." That afternoon, I quietly transferred control of my investments, properties, and business shares into the trust. On paper, I still looked wealthy. In reality, no one could touch a dollar without my approval. 2 days later, Emily approached me with a folder. "I've been thinking," she said gently. "Life is unpredictable. Maybe it's time to update your will." There it was, the moment she'd been waiting for. I pretended to hesitate. "You think so?" She nodded. "Ryan deserves security after everything he's been through." I looked at Ethan. Instead of smiling, he looked down at the floor. For the first time, he seemed guilty. "I'll think about it," I replied. That evening, I noticed Ethan sitting alone on the back porch. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded without looking at me. "I've never had a real father." The words sounded different this time. Not rehearsed, not polished, just sad. I sat beside him. "You know," I said quietly, "living a lie eventually catches up with everyone." His shoulders stiffened. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he whispered, "Some lies start because people are desperate." Before I could ask what he meant, Emily opened the back door. "There you two are." Ethan immediately stood up. The conversation ended, but his expression told me everything. He was cracking. Later that night, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Michael, the investigator. Emergency. Call me now. I stepped outside and dialed his number. His voice was urgent. I found out why your wife met that attorney. Why? They weren't updating your will. What were they doing? They were preparing documents to declare you mentally unfit, and transfer control of your entire estate. For a moment, I couldn't speak. They weren't waiting for me to die. They were planning to take everything while I was still alive. And according to Michael, the paperwork was scheduled to be filed in less than 48 hours. For several minutes, I sat alone in my car, staring at the dashboard. 48 hours. That was all I had before Emily's plan moved from deception to disaster. I called James immediately. Tell me the truth, I said. Can someone really take control of my estate by claiming I'm mentally unfit? They can try, he replied. But they'd need evidence, witnesses, and medical opinions. What if those witnesses are lying? Then we expose them. His calm voice gave me hope. We're going to beat them, he said, but we need proof. The next morning, I installed discreet voice recorders in my home office and living room, where Emily usually made private phone calls when she thought I was away. Then I left the house, or at least I made sure she believed I had. Instead, I stayed in the detached garage, watching through the security cameras connected to my phone. Exactly 30 minutes later, a black sedan pulled into the driveway. A man in a gray suit stepped out. It was the same man from the investigator's photographs. Emily welcomed him inside. A few minutes later, Ethan joined them. The three sat around my dining table. I couldn't hear them from the cameras. But the recorders could. An hour later, after the visitor left, I entered the house while Emily was grocery shopping. I removed the recorder and rushed to my office. James and Michael were already waiting. We played the audio. Emily's voice came first. Once Daniel signs the final documents, we won't need him anymore. The attorney replied, if he refuses, we'll continue with the incapacity petition. Then came Ethan's voice. This has gone too far. Emily snapped back. You already took the money. Finish the job. I agreed to act, Ethan said quietly. I never agreed to destroy an innocent man's life. The room fell silent. James paused the recording. That's it, he said. This changes everything. For the first time, Ethan had openly turned against Emily. He wasn't innocent, but he wasn't willing to follow her all the way. That evening, there was a knock at my office door. It was Ethan. His face was pale. I need to tell you something, he said. I folded my arms. I'm listening. He took a deep breath. My real name isn't Ryan. I know. He looked shocked. I also know you're an actor. His shoulders dropped. I never expected you to find out. He reached into his backpack and placed a thick envelope on my desk. I can't keep lying. Inside were copies of text messages, bank transfers, and a signed agreement. Every page pointed to the same person. Emily. Then Ethan looked me in the eyes. I'll testify against her. Before I could answer, the front door slammed. Emily had come home early. She walked into the office, and froze. Her eyes landed on the open envelope. Then on Ethan. Then on me. She realized, in a single terrifying second. The truth was finally out. Emily stood frozen in the doorway. For a few long seconds, no one spoke. Then she forced a nervous laugh. What's going on? I slowly pushed the envelope across my desk. Why don't you tell me? She glanced at the documents. The color drained from her face. I don't know what those are. Ethan stepped forward. Stop lying, Emily. She turned toward him in disbelief. What are you doing? I'm done. You signed a contract, she hissed. And I regret every second of it. I stood up. So it was all true. Emily's eyes filled with tears. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Then how was it supposed to happen? I asked. You wanted me declared mentally unfit. You wanted control of everything I own. She opened her mouth but couldn't answer. I picked up the bank records. You paid Ethan to pretend to be my son. She looked at the floor. Finally, she whispered, yes. The single word hit harder than any scream. 22 years of marriage collapsed in an instant. But I never wanted to hurt you, she cried. You planned to steal my life, I replied. You already did. Just then, there was another knock at the front door. James and Michael walked inside. Emily stared at them in horror. James calmly placed another folder on the table. We've already filed documents protecting Mr. Carter's assets, Michael added, and every important conversation in this house has been recorded. Emily's hands began to shake. This can't be happening. It already has, I said. She suddenly grabbed her purse and rushed toward the front door. Michael stepped into her path. It's over, Emily. She stopped. The confidence she had carried for months disappeared. She looked exhausted, defeated. Ethan quietly walked over to me. I know you can never forgive me. I looked at him for a long moment. You lied to me, I know, but you also stopped this before it was too late. He nodded silently. Then James spoke. There's one more thing you need to see. He opened another file. Inside were emails between Emily and the attorney. As I turned the pages, one message made my blood run cold. After we control the estate, Daniel becomes a problem. We'll discuss the next step later. I looked up. What does the next step mean? No one answered. Even Emily looked terrified, because those words hadn't been written by her. They had been written by the attorney. And suddenly, it was clear. Emily hadn't been the mastermind after all. Someone far more dangerous had been pulling the strings from the very beginning. The room fell silent. I read the email again. After we control the estate, Daniel becomes a problem. Those weren't Emily's words. They belonged to attorney Victor Lang. James took the folder from my hands. I've been looking into him, he said. His record isn't as clean as it appears. Michael nodded. 3 wealthy clients hired him over the last 10 years. Each one lost control of their estates before dying under completely unrelated circumstances. Were the deaths investigated? I asked. They were ruled natural or accidental. A chill ran through the room. Emily collapsed into a chair. I swear, I never knew. I looked at her. You expect me to believe that? Tears streamed down her face. I only wanted the money. Victor said everything would be legal. He promised no one would get hurt. James shook his head. He lied to you. Emily buried her face in her hands. I've made the biggest mistake of my life. Just then, Michael's phone rang. He answered, listened for a few seconds, then looked at me. Victor knows. What? He found out Ethan confessed. How? The investigator watching his office says he emptied his desk, destroyed files, and left 20 minutes ago. James immediately stood up. We have to move now. Within an hour, we handed every recording, email, contract, and bank transfer to detectives. The evidence was overwhelming, but one problem remained. Victor had disappeared. For the next 3 days, no one could find him. Emily agreed to cooperate completely. She gave investigators passwords, emails, and financial records. Everything pointed to Victor as the architect of the scheme. Then, on the 4th night, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I answered. A calm voice spoke. You've caused me a great deal of trouble, Mr. Carter. I recognized it instantly. Victor, you won't get away with this, I said. He laughed. I already have. The call ended. Seconds later, my security cameras sent an alert. Someone was standing outside my front gate, wearing a dark coat, watching my house, not moving, just watching. When the police arrived minutes later, the figure was gone, but on the gate hung a single white envelope. Inside was one handwritten sentence. This isn't over. I realized then that exposing the conspiracy had only won the first battle. The man behind it was still free. And now, he was coming after me personally. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound outside made me reach for my phone. By sunrise, 2 detectives were parked across the street, watching the house. James insisted I stay somewhere else. I refused. This is my home, I said. I'm not running. Ethan stayed too. I helped create this mess, he said. I'm helping end it. For the first time since he'd arrived, I believed him. Later that afternoon, Detective Laura Bennett called. We found something in Victor Lang's office. What is it? A hidden storage drive. She wouldn't reveal details over the phone. An hour later, James, Ethan, and I arrived at the police station. Laura placed the drive on the table. It contains contracts, recordings, and financial records. My stomach tightened. There are 7 victims, she continued. You were supposed to be number 8. Every victim followed the same pattern. First, Victor gained their trust. Then he convinced them to change legal documents. Finally, he positioned someone close to them to influence every decision. Emily hadn't invented the scheme. She had become part of it. Laura opened another file. This is why he disappeared. Inside were copies of offshore bank transfers totaling millions of dollars. Victor had been stealing from wealthy clients for years. Then Laura played one final recording recovered from the drive. Victor's voice filled the room. If Daniel Carter becomes suspicious, leave immediately. I'll handle the rest. The room fell silent. Laura looked at me. We believed he was preparing to disappear overseas. Just then, another detective rushed into the room. We've got a hit. Everyone turned. He used one of his old credit cards. Where? Laura asked. The airport. Within minutes, police units were on their way. Hours later, my phone rang. Laura sounded relieved. We got him. I closed my eyes. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. Victor Lang had been arrested before boarding an international flight. When investigators searched his luggage, they found cash, fake identities, encrypted phones, and documents connected to dozens of fraudulent estate cases. The nightmare was finally collapsing. A month later, the courtroom was packed. Victor sat silently as prosecutors presented recording after recording. Bank transfers, contracts, witness testimony. Then Ethan took the stand. He admitted everything. He accepted responsibility for his role and apologized under oath. Finally, Emily stood before the judge. Through tears, she confessed to joining the scheme because of greed. She never looked at me once. When the verdicts were announced, the courtroom was silent. Justice had finally caught up with everyone involved. But as I walked out of the courthouse, I realized something unexpected. Winning the case hadn't given me my old life back. It had simply given me the chance to build a new one. 6 months passed. For the first time in years, my house was quiet. No lies, no whispered phone calls, no strangers pretending to be family. Just silence. Emily and I finalized our divorce without speaking more than a few words. She accepted responsibility for her actions and made no attempt to claim any part of the estate she had tried so hard to control. Victor Lang's trial continued for months. More victims came forward. Some had lost millions, others had lost homes that had been in their families for generations. Every new witness revealed another piece of the same carefully planned scheme. One afternoon, Detective Laura Bennett called me. There's someone who wants to meet you. Who? The parents of one of Victor's earlier victims. I agreed. They were an elderly couple who had spent years trying to prove their son's fortune had been stolen before his death. For years, no one believed them. Now, thanks to the evidence from my case, investigators had reopened theirs. The elderly man shook my hand with tears in his eyes. You gave us hope again. Those words meant more to me than any amount of money. A week later, Ethan knocked on my front door. This time, he came alone. No lies, no rehearsed story. I wanted to return this, he said. He handed me the old family photograph he had once used to convince me he was my son. It never belonged to me. I looked at him for a long moment. You could have disappeared. I almost did, he admitted. But running would have made me the same as Victor. He took a deep breath. I've started working at a community theater again. It's honest work. For the first time, I smiled. I'm glad. As he turned to leave, I stopped him. Ethan. He looked back. You made terrible choices, I know, but you also chose to tell the truth when it mattered most. His eyes filled with tears. Thank you. He walked away without looking back. Months later, I decided to do something I had postponed for years. I established the Carter Foundation, a charity that offered free legal assistance to elderly people and families vulnerable to financial fraud. If my experience could protect even one person, then some good would come from everything I'd lost. On the opening day, reporters asked why I had created it. I answered with complete honesty. Money can always be earned again. Trust is much harder to rebuild. If we can help people protect both, we've succeeded. As the ceremony ended, James walked over with a smile. You know, he said, your greatest inheritance was never your fortune. What was it? Your character. I looked around at the volunteers helping strangers, the families finding hope, and the people who had stood beside me through the darkest chapter of my life. For the first time since that stranger knocked on my door claiming to be my son, I truly felt free. 1 year later, life looked nothing like it had before. The house was still the same. The oak tree still stood in the front yard. The old grandfather clock still chimed every hour. But everything else had changed. The silence that once reminded me of betrayal had become peaceful. Every morning I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, grateful for something I had once taken for granted, the ability to trust my own instincts again. The Carter Foundation had grown beyond anything I imagined. What started as a small office helping elderly victims of financial fraud had expanded into several cities. Lawyers volunteered their weekends. Retired investigators offered free consultations. Families who believed they had lost everything finally had somewhere to turn. One afternoon, James walked into my office carrying a thick envelope. You've received another letter, he said. No reporters this time, I hope. He smiled. No, this one's personal. The envelope had no return address. For a moment, I hesitated. Then I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. It was from Emily. She wrote that prison had given her something she had never possessed before, time to think. She admitted that greed had not appeared overnight. It had grown slowly, one selfish decision after another, until she could no longer recognize the person she had become. She apologized for every lie, for every tear she had faked, for every moment she had betrayed the man who had trusted her. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She simply hoped I had found peace. I folded the letter and quietly placed it back into the envelope. Some apologies arrived too late, but accepting that truth was part of moving forward. A week later, Ethan visited the foundation. This time, he wasn't carrying fake documents or rehearsed stories. He was carrying boxes of donated food for a community fundraiser. "I thought you could use an extra pair of hands," he said. "You came all this way just to volunteer." He smiled. "I owe the world more than one apology." We spent the day working side by side. As the last family left with food and supplies, I realized something. People can change. Not everyone does, but some truly try. Months passed. Victor Lang was convicted on every major charge. The judge described his crimes as calculated, heartless, and devastating to countless families. His illegal fortune was seized. Some of the recovered money was returned to victims. No sentence could erase the damage he had caused. But justice had finally caught up with him. One autumn evening, I drove to the cemetery where my parents were buried. I hadn't visited in years. Standing beside their graves, I thought about everything that had happened. I had almost lost my fortune, my marriage, my reputation, my peace of mind, but in the end, I had discovered something more valuable than any inheritance. Character, truth, and the courage to walk away from people who valued money more than love. As I turned to leave, I noticed a young father helping his little boy place flowers on another grave nearby. The child reached for his father's hand. The father smiled and held it tightly. I couldn't stop smiling, because I finally understood something that had taken me a lifetime to learn. Family is never defined by documents. Not by blood, not by a last name, not by an inheritance. Family is defined by the people who stand beside you when they have nothing to gain. On the anniversary of the day Ethan first knocked on my door, I hosted a dinner at my house. James came, Detective Laura Bennett came, several volunteers from the foundation came. Even Ethan accepted the invitation. As everyone laughed around the table, I looked at the empty chair where Emily used to sit. For the first time, it didn't make me angry. It reminded me how precious trust really is. Before dessert, I stood and raised my glass. A year ago, I thought my greatest achievement was everything I owned. Everyone listened quietly. I was wrong. My greatest achievement is sitting in this room with people who chose honesty over greed, loyalty over deception, and hope over fear. The room filled with applause. Ethan looked down, wiping away a tear. James smiled proudly. Laura simply nodded. That night, after everyone left, I locked the front door and walked through the quiet house. It no longer felt haunted by betrayal. It finally felt like home. I looked out the window at the stars and whispered the words I wished I had understood years earlier. The greatest inheritance isn't money. It's the life you build with integrity. And for the first time since a stranger claimed to be my long-lost son, I knew that no one could ever steal that from me. Epilogue, a legacy that could never be stolen. Nearly 2 years had passed since the day a stranger appeared at my front door claiming to be my long-lost son. Time had softened the pain, but it had not erased the lessons. The Carter Foundation had become more than a legal charity. It had become a place where people walked in feeling defeated and left believing they still had a future. Every week, I met families who reminded me of myself. Some had been manipulated by caregivers. Others had been pressured into signing documents they didn't understand. Many believed there was no way to recover what they had lost. Whenever possible, I told them my story. Not because I wanted sympathy. Because I wanted them to know that deception doesn't always win. One rainy afternoon, an elderly widow named Margaret arrived carrying a worn folder. She explained that someone had convinced her to transfer ownership of her home. Her voice shook as she spoke. "I don't know who to trust anymore." I gently smiled. "I know exactly how that feels." Our legal team spent months helping her recover her property. The day she received the court order restoring her ownership, she hugged every volunteer in the office. Moments like that reminded me why the foundation existed. One evening, James stopped by after work. "You've changed," he said. "Hopefully for the better. You don't measure success by money anymore." I laughed. I had to lose almost everything before I understood what really mattered. He nodded. Most people never learn that lesson. A few weeks later, I received unexpected news. Ethan had been accepted into a respected theater company. He called me personally. "I wanted you to hear it from me." "Congratulations," I said sincerely. I almost threw my life away for quick money. But you didn't. No, he replied quietly. You gave me a second chance. After we hung up, I realized forgiveness isn't about pretending the past never happened. It's about refusing to let the past control the future. Months later, the Carter Foundation held its annual fundraiser. Hundreds of people attended. Victims whose lives had been rebuilt stood alongside volunteers, attorneys, investigators, and community leaders. During my speech, I looked across the room and saw faces filled with hope instead of fear. I once believed an inheritance was measured in dollars, I said. I was wrong. The greatest inheritance we leave behind is our honesty, our kindness, and the lives we change. The audience rose in applause. As I stepped away from the podium, I thought about the man I had been before all of this happened. He trusted too easily. He believed love alone could protect him. He measured success by wealth. The man standing there now was different. Stronger, wiser, and finally at peace. Late that night, after everyone had gone home, I locked the foundation's front door. I looked up at the illuminated sign bearing my family's name. For years, I had worked to build an estate that others wanted to steal. Now I had built something no thief could ever take. A legacy of justice, a legacy of compassion, a legacy of hope. As I walked toward my car, my phone buzzed with a message from James. Proud of you, my friend. I smiled, slipped the phone into my pocket, and looked toward the stars. The fortune I had fought so hard to protect would one day belong to someone else. But the lives we had changed together would continue long after I was gone. And in that moment, I finally understood the truth. The greatest inheritance is never the wealth you leave behind. It is the character, courage, and kindness that continue to inspire others long after your story ends. The end.